All right, today I'm going to paint Mount Burdell here in Novato, California. And I'm going to do it using my method of establish, compare, and refine. So, start with a blank canvas here, and I um, got my palette laid out here. I'll just go through those colors real quick. I got titanium white, I got cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, cobalt violet hue, yellow ochre, manganese blue hue, ultramarine blue, viridian, green gold, um, burnt sienna, and burnt umber. And for in my palette cups, I have Gamsol as my solvent, and I have Natural Pigments Pale Drying Oil as my medium. So I'll explain those a little more as I go along. So, all right, let's get started. Okay, first thing I want to do is just do a quick little drawing of my scene here without much detail. It's really just to establish the composition and the placement of things. So just going to start really quick by establishing the angles of the scene that I'm painting here. Start with the overall shape of the mountain. It comes down here. It's very sort of quintessential California hill, so it's got that rounded edge to it with lots of oaks on it. Not going to worry about all the individual oaks, just giving myself a little bit of an indication of where things are going to go. So you can notice I'm not really spending a lot of time trying to actually make an accurate or detailed drawing of things here. It's really just to know where things are going to go when I start to put paint on everything. So that kind of looks very chicken scratch-ish to me right now. And this is something I do all the time, but in this case, I want to have a better pattern to see before I work on anything. So I'm just doing a quick wash of where the dark shapes are. This is just so that I know my composition is working okay before I start to put my paint down. So just a really thinned out wash of what I got. Manganese blue hue and burnt sienna. Makes sort of a warm brown, grayish brown. I'm going to paint the scene quickly, so make sure everything is working in the composition stage before I start to. This is all just, I still consider this drawing, even though I'm just drawing in mass flat tones. Almost like I'm doing an ink wash, but with oil paint. It's a bit too much. So, believe it or not, that's all the indication as far as drawing goes that I need for a scene like this. So we'll get into the next part, which is establishing the color relationships and putting down the first shapes of color in oil. Okay, so first thing I want to do is establish the largest shapes that I see in the scene, and I be the part of the scene that, or tends to be the color that determines the overall mood and value key of the scene itself. So what I'm doing first is taking a pile of my white and tinting it with the color that I just graying it down a little bit. And the way I'm mixing my gray is I'm taking a little bit of cobalt violet and a little bit of yellow ochre and mix it into my white. Just a tiny bit. Maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue. It's just enough to make it a little bit of an off-white, kind of a very sort of like almost eggshell white here. And there's actually variation in these clouds that are starting to come in, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. Using my medium to make sure I'm able to move my paint around pretty easily. And so next what I will do is I'll start to make the darker shapes of the hill. So painting basically the oaks that I see. So looking at the colors, they're very grayed down. So I'm taking Viridian, some burnt umber, and making a gray out of that. And there's a little bit of bluishness in it, so taking a little bit of my manganese blue hue. So all I'm doing is just quickly coming in and covering up the areas of the scene that are rows of oaks. Okay, so that's an average color and value of the distant oaks there. So I'm going to come in and from there make a slightly warmer and darker version of that to establish these trees that are in front. Just adding more Viridian yellow ochre in that scene. There's going to be a lot of variation in these trees, but I'm not worrying about that quite yet. And finally, these trees that are in front are really starting to lose their leaves and change color, so they're a lot more brown than the other ones around it. Establish the color of the grasses that are around. Okay, it's going to take a little time to adjust to get to the color I need, so I'm just adding things from my palette that look like they are closer to it. So I went a little too yellow at first, tried to add red. That was a little too pink, so I added purple to it, and that's getting pretty close. So that's the color for the distant hill there, and it's a lot more green in the hills that are closer to us. So adding a little bit of Viridian and green gold to make the colors that I'm seeing here. Even though it's probably more brown in real life, this sort of minty green is a little more appealing to me right now. So fresher grass in the foreground, or not in the foreground, but closer down here. So adding a little bit more saturated green. This foreground grass, that's the brownest and grayest. So the grays that I'm making are really just produced by mixing greens and violets, a little bit of browns into them. And in order to get colors I want, I'm just messing with the ratios. So if I want to go darker and cooler, I'll add more violet to it. I start noticing that it's a little too purplish with not enough green. I'll go in with my green gold and start to add that back into my mixture. And I just keep doing that until I get something that sort of approximates what I'm seeing there. Okay, so that pretty much gives me a rough estimate of the colors and values and patterns that I'm gonna work with in order to create my painting here. So next step will be to establish a stronger light and dark pattern here. So we'll do that in a sec. I have basically the overall shape in relative colors and values going on here. I want to reestablish the values a bit. I feel like they're not quite where I want them to be. So I'm going to basically just go in and try and refine the values that I have going on here. Just painting into what I already have, using the mixing that happens as a result to try and get to the color I want. The clouds are actually moving pretty quickly, which is changing my scene a bit. So I'll just have to work from where I feel like I'm better established and just keep going from there rather than trying to chase the effect. Oaks that are closer become a little darker. You gotta be careful in a gray day, cloudy scene like this, not to go too cool or too desaturated. There's actually a lot of great color you can find in foliage like this, and you see actually kind of truer color because there's not the color of the sun over influencing the actual color of the shape you're painting. Although natural colors usually aren't as saturated as people think they are, it's possible to go too far in the other way and neglect to see all the rich, beautiful grays that you can find in a cloudy day like this. So there's not a really strong light and dark shadow pattern in a completely overcast day like today. So rather than trying to force a light and dark pattern onto it, I'm just more subtly showing the difference between the darker shapes that I see and the lighter ones. Reestablish this shape of this tree here. All right, so in this stage, we will begin to compare and contrast the areas that I have established so far in order to get a more accurate sense of color to all aspects of my painting. And I don't think I'm too far off with a lot of what I've done already, but it's definitely worth trying to get closer to it. So I'm mixing some yellow ochre into my cobalt violet with some viridian in it. So as I keep working on it, I actually notice that there's a lot more green in these shapes. This is where I start to add that in. And I think that those distant oaks are actually darker than I have them, but I'm debating on actually making them darker because I don't want to take away from what's happening down here. So instead of making them darker, I'll just sort of refine the shapes a little more. And what I'll do is take some viridian and cobalt blue again, or cobalt violet, and add a little bit of ultramarine, and that's about what I used to create this color before. Maybe a little green gold in it. Actually adding a little bit of manganese blue hue into it for the more distant areas that have a bit more atmosphere. They go bluer. As I remembered, the cobalt violet and viridian mixture is what mainly comprises this mixture for these distant oaks. So I'm just going in with a smaller brush, tightening up those shapes a little bit. Not too much. It's not really my main area of focus, but I also don't want it to be too wishy-washy back here either. I enjoy that these shapes fade into each other by virtue of being close in value, so don't want to disturb that. I'd rather keep the areas of contrast closer to the area of focus. The stage of it is just refining shapes. Once I'm okay with the colors I have, then just going and refining shapes and just further breaking down the shapes I already established. Kind of still comparing a bit, but it's pretty well compared, so just making little micro comparisons to really refine things. It's more or less what I'm doing here. A lot of times for me, adding detail isn't actually like painting little individual things. It's just going smaller and smaller when it comes to creating shapes. So like I'm still treating things the same way as I would when I was creating larger shapes. They just get smaller and smaller as I get further and further into the painting. Still staying within the same family of mixtures. Viridian, cobalt violet, browns here and there, like my burnt umbers and burnt siennas, a little bit of yellow ochre here and there when I need to go lighter. Not touching the white nearly as often as you may think you need to. Just going in and cleaning up shapes, making them a little sharper and more defined in some areas. Just gives a little bit more of a refined finish to the paintings. But yeah, when you're working under a time limit like you are outdoors, just by the fact that the light changes, it's a different scene than you started with after 2 hours. You just really got to make quick decisions about where you want to focus your time and effort into. So it's doing really quick little passes on these smaller shapes, but it's really important that you, while you're doing it, you concentrate so that you're not messing things up. It's a really delicate balance between working quickly and being careful. So just over time you'll develop more efficiency when it comes to all that, but just be mindful of it in the beginning and you'll get further along quicker. Part of this is actually using the negative shapes to refine some of these trees, giving a little bit more character to them. But yeah, I'm just going in and making more focused shapes in some of these areas here, just to make sure that there aren't too many mushy areas of my painting, just undefined areas that don't add much to the structure of the scene. One of the things that I haven't done enough yet, but I'm doing now, is kind of establishing the shadow that these trees cast on the ground. And that really helps to show the solidity of these objects. If not, they just feel a little too mushy and nondescript without it. With them, then you know exactly what you're looking at, really. Again, using the negative shapes to define the shape of this tree here. It's a really odd looking oak, so might look a little funny in my painting, so I gotta make sure that when I'm doing a tree like this, I kind of have to redesign it a bit if it's not working well in my piece. Careful when you're coming back in over these shapes that you have to kind of remix some of these colors that maybe you didn't create since you first, or you didn't touch since you first put them down in the establishment phase. So that's another reason that you want to keep your mixtures relatively simple, so that if it comes down to needing to mix them again, it's not too difficult to do so.